Sophia lived in a small rural village with her parents and older brother Michael. Life was difficult, her family was poor, struggling daily to find enough food and money to survive. Her father took on low-paying jobs, repairing broken fences and carrying heavy sacks at the market. Her mother sold vegetables under the scorching sun, hoping to earn enough for dinner. Michael tried to find work, but no one would hire him because he had nothing to offer. They had endured worse times, days when they had no home. Once, they were evicted from their house after failing to pay rent for months. For months, they lived on the streets, sleeping in an abandoned shed. When it rained, they had no shelter. Yet, through it all, her parents never gave up on education. Money comes and goes, her father often said, but no one can take knowledge away from you. Even when they had no food, no shoes, or proper clothes, her parents ensured Sophia and Michael attended school. Sophia was a bright student. She studied diligently, even on an empty stomach. She refused to let poverty define her. One day, her hard work paid off. She won a scholarship to study. It was her only chance to change her life. She left the village and went to university. After years of dedication, Sophia graduated. She was proud of herself, proud that she had overcome so many struggles. She found work as a cashier at a small company. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She could now send money home to help her parents and perhaps begin a new life. She thought things would be different now. She thought she had left her past behind, but her background followed her. She was a young woman, ready to settle down and start a family. She dreamed of love, of a husband and children, of a home filled with warmth and happiness. At first, men showed interest in her. They smiled, asked her out, and made her feel special. But then the questions came, "Where is your family from?" And when she answered, everything changed. They pulled away. No one wanted to marry a woman who had been homeless. No one wanted to build a future with someone who had nothing. It hurt every time. It hurt deeply. She told herself it didn't matter. She had survived worse. She would survive this too. But deep down, it weighed heavily on her. She wasn't the only one suffering. Her brother Michael faced the same pain. Every time he tried to court a woman, he was rejected. People whispered about their past, about how their family had nothing. No woman wanted to struggle with him. She saw how it broke him, and that broke her even more. They had worked so hard, but no matter what they did, things didn't seem to improve. One evening, Sophia's mother came home holding a brown envelope. Her father followed, his face serious. "Sophia, come inside," her mother said. "We need to talk." Sophia sat at the small wooden table as her father placed the letter in front of her. She looked at it, confused. Her father cleared his throat. "A wealthy man wants to marry you," he said. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "What?" she asked. Her mother nodded. "His name is Mr. Daniel. He is the richest man from our village." Sophia frowned. "The same Mr. Daniel?" Her father sighed. "Yes. The name is well known, but people haven't seen him much. He left the village years ago and now lives in the city. They say he owns land, farms, and several businesses." Sophia picked up the letter with trembling hands and began reading. The words blurred before her eyes. "I am 60 years old. I am a man of means. I will take care of your daughter and your family. This marriage will bring her comfort and security." Her chest tightened. 60 years old. Her mother's voice was soft. "He wants to marry you, Sophia. He says he will take care of you and us." Silence filled the room. Sophia didn't know what to say. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Her father stood up and opened it. Two men stood outside, carrying sacks of maize, rice, and flour. Behind them, another man held a basket of vegetables and bottles of cooking oil. "Who sent this?" her father asked, his voice shaking. The tallest man smiled. "Mr. Daniel. He says this is just a small gift. There will be more when he comes to see your daughter." Sophia watched as her mother covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Her father nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. The men placed the food inside and left. Sophia looked at the sacks, the rice, the oil, enough food to last them for weeks. Her father turned to her. "Sophia, this man can change our lives." Her mother wiped her tears. "Just think about it, my child." Sophia felt her chest tighten. Was this her only way out? A few days later, Sophia sat on her bed, staring at the flickering flame of the small lantern beside her. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This wasn't the life she wanted. She was only 23 years old. She had dreams. She wanted to fall in love, marry someone who made her heart happy, build a future filled with joy. But now, those dreams seemed impossible. Mr. Daniel was 60 years old, too old for her. She looked at the letter again, reading the words over and over, hoping they would change. But they didn't. The truth remained the same: she was being asked to marry a man old enough to be her father. Her chest ached. She wanted to say no. She wanted to run. But then she thought about her family. She had seen the pain in her mother's eyes when those sacks of food arrived. It was the first time in a long while that her mother knew they wouldn't sleep hungry. She had seen the tiredness on her father's face, the way he sat in silence, too weak to speak sometimes. And then she remembered the medical report she had found a few days ago while cleaning the house. It had been tucked between old papers in a wooden box. She had opened it out of curiosity, only to feel her world shatter. Her father was sick. The report said he needed surgery, a surgery that cost more money than they had ever seen in their lives. He hadn't told her. None of them had. They didn't want her to worry. But now she knew, and she could not pretend. She thought about her brother Michael, about how hard he tried, how many times he was turned away just because he was poor. He wanted a better life too, but the world did not care. She wiped her face and took a deep breath. If this was what it took to save her family, if this was the price she had to pay for her father to live, for her mother to stop worrying, for her brother to have a chance, then she would do it. She walked to the small table where her parents sat, their hopeful eyes watching her, waiting. She swallowed hard, then whispered, "If it means sacrificing myself for my family, then I will do it." Her mother burst into tears. Her father closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. It was done. She had made her choice. The day had come. Sophia sat quietly on a wooden stool, her hands resting on her lap, her heart pounding. Mr. Daniel was coming. Her mother had made her wear her best dress, a simple blue gown that had been worn too many times but was still presentable. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her face was fresh with only a touch of oil to keep her skin from looking dry. Her father sat beside her, his hands folded, his face unreadable. Michael stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the road. Then they saw it, a black car coming down the dusty village path. Sophia swallowed hard. This was real now. The car stopped in front of their house, and the door opened. A man stepped out. Mr. Daniel. He was old and wrinkled, just as she had imagined. His hair was completely gray, his back slightly bent, and his steps slow. But his face was calm, and when he smiled, there was warmth in his eyes. Sophia felt her breath hitch. She had feared he would be cruel, arrogant, or unkind. But now, looking at him, he didn't seem like a bad person. He greeted her parents first, shaking her father's hand with respect. Then he turned to her. "So, you are Sophia?" he said, his voice deep but gentle. She nodded, unable to find her words. He chuckled softly. I've heard a lot about you. A strong, intelligent young woman. She glanced at her parents, unsure how to respond. Come sit with me, he said, pointing to a bench outside. Her legs felt weak as she walked over and sat beside him. She could feel everyone's eyes on them, but for a moment, she focused only on him. They talked. She had expected awkward silence, but he spoke with wisdom in a carefree manner, much like they were friends. He asked about her life, her dreams, her family. And when she spoke, he listened. He didn't rush her. He didn't talk down to her or demand respect. Instead, he smiled and said, "You are a bright young woman. I admire that." She had feared this meeting, but now, sitting beside him, she didn't feel as scared anymore. Yes, he was old, but at least he was kind and treated her well. And maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be as terrible as she had imagined. The days passed quickly. Before Sophia could fully accept what was happening, the wedding had been arranged. Her mother and a few village women helped her prepare. They sewed a simple white dress, not fancy, but beautiful in its own way. They braided her hair neatly and rubbed a little oil on her skin to make her glow. People whispered, some with excitement, others with pity. A young girl marrying a man that old. She had no choice. It is for her family. Sophia heard them, but she remained silent. She had already made up her mind. The morning of the wedding, she stood in front of a small mirror, staring at her reflection. She looked like a bride, but she did not feel like one. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her veil. Her mother came in and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "My child," she whispered, "this is your life now. Be strong, be a good wife, and remember, no matter what, you are still my daughter." Tears filled Sophia's eyes. She nodded. Then, it was time. The ceremony was simple but grand in its own way. People gathered to watch, some curious, some happy, some just there for the food. Mr. Daniel stood at the front, dressed in a well-tailored suit. His eyes were warm, his smile soft. He was old, yes, but at that moment, he did not look scary. Sophia walked towards him, her steps slow, her heart heavy. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But she didn't. She stood beside him, her hands cold, as he gently took them in his own. The vows were spoken. "Do you, Sophia, take Mr. Daniel to be your husband?" Her lips trembled. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I do." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She looked at Mr. Daniel, and for the first time, she didn't feel as afraid. He was not the man she had dreamed of marrying, but she promised herself that if she was going to do this, she would do it well. She would be faithful to him, and she would take care of him to the best of her ability. The ceremony ended, the people cheered, and just like that, Sophia was now a wife. The journey to the city was long and quiet. Sophia sat beside Mr. Daniel in his luxurious car, staring out of the window as the dusty village road slowly turned into smooth, wide streets, the lights, the noise, the busy people. It was a different world. Her heart pounded as the car stopped in front of a massive house. The gates opened, and they drove inside. The house was grand and beautiful, bigger than anything she had ever imagined. Everything looked new, shiny, expensive. Servants rushed to carry their bags inside. This was her home now. Sophia followed Mr. Daniel into the house, feeling small and out of place. The rooms were large, the floors so clean that they reflected the light above. She had never lived in such comfort before, but instead of happiness, all she felt was fear. The wedding had felt like a dream, but this was real now. And tonight, she was expected to share a bed with her husband. Her heart raced. She had never been with a man before. Mr. Daniel noticed her discomfort. He turned to her and smiled gently. "Sophia, I know this is new for you, he said softly. You don't have to be afraid. Feel free, this is your home now. She nodded, but her hands were still trembling. After a while, she excused herself and went to the bedroom. It was huge, with a soft white bed, a golden mirror, and curtains that flowed like water. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, her heart beating fast. A few moments later, Mr. Daniel entered. He walked over and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. I'll take a shower first, he said kindly. You can rest. She nodded again, unable to speak. Mr. Daniel picked up a towel and walked into the bathroom. She listened as the water began to run. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The water kept running. Why was he taking so long? Sophia's fear returned. Was something wrong? She glanced at the bathroom door, her breath shallow. Should she knock? Should she call out his name? Her hands gripped the bed sheet. Something didn't feel right. Sophia sat on the bed, her hands clasped tightly together. The sound of running water filled the room. An hour passed, then 2. She kept glancing at the bathroom door, wondering why Mr. Daniel was taking so long. Her heart was uneasy. She thought of knocking, but something held her back. What if he needed privacy? What if something was wrong? Her body felt heavy with exhaustion. The day had been long, the wedding, the journey, the overwhelming new life. Her eyes grew tired. She lay down slowly, telling herself she would just rest for a moment. But before she knew it, sleep took her. A sudden sound woke her. Her eyes fluttered open. The bathroom door creaked. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. The shower was still running, but the man stepping out of the bathroom was not Mr. Daniel. Sophia froze. A young man stood before her, tall, strong, handsome. His hair was wet, his face smooth and youthful, his body wrapped in a towel. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know him. Her body went cold with fear. Where was Mr. Daniel? Who was this man? She screamed. She stumbled back, her hands grabbing the bed sheets, her whole body shaking. Who are you? She cried. The young man raised his hand slowly as if to calm her. Sophia, he said softly. She gasped. That voice, she knew that voice. It was Mr. Daniel's voice, but how? Sophia shook her head. This had to be a trick, a dream, a nightmare. No, no, this isn't real, she whispered, her voice breaking. The young man stepped closer. It's me. Sophia's whole world began to spin. She sat frozen, her body stiff with fear and confusion. The young man in front of her looked nothing like Mr. Daniel, but his voice, it was the same. She shook her head, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then he stepped closer. Before she could move, he gently pulled her into his arms. His hands were warm, firm, steady. Sophia, he whispered. Then he kissed her. His lips were slow, soft, and deep, filling her with an unfamiliar warmth. Her heart pounded. For a moment, just for a moment, she forgot everything. The room disappeared, the fear melted. All that remained was the kiss. But then reality came crashing back. No, she pushed him away, her breath uneven, her body shaking. She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the bed for support. Where is my husband? She cried, tears filling her eyes. The young man sighed. Sophia, listen to me. No, she screamed. I don't know you. Where is my husband? Where is Mr. Daniel? She ran toward the bathroom, expecting to see the old man she had married, but it was empty. She spun around, her chest rising and falling in panic. The young man stepped forward again. I am your husband. Sophia shook her head violently. No. No, this is a lie. She fell to her knees, sobbing. The young man knelt beside her. He didn't touch her this time, he simply spoke. Sophia, I know this is hard to believe, but I am Mr. Daniel. I have always been Mr. Daniel. She lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. How? He took a deep breath. I use special makeup to look old. Her eyes widened. Why? She whispered. He looked at her, his expression gentle but serious. Because I needed to know who you really were. Sophia swallowed hard. My grandfather once told me a good woman is not found with money but with wisdom. I have wealth, Sophia, more than most people can imagine, but I did not want a wife who only wanted my money. I wanted a woman with a kind heart, a strong spirit, and a love that is true. He paused. I had heard about you, your struggles, your kindness, your sacrifices for your family. I wanted to see if it was real or if you, like many others, would marry for riches alone. Sophia's heart pounded. Everything was spinning. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't care how you look, she said, her voice trembling. I just want my husband back. She stood up, her body shaking. He may be old, he may be wrinkled, but he is kind, and I have already promised to take care of him. Her hands clenched into fists. I will not be fooled by appearances. The young man sighed, his eyes filled with something Sophia could not understand. Sophia, he said softly. Do you remember an old man you once helped? She frowned, confused. What? When you were a cashier in the city, he continued, there was an old man who came to your shop one evening. He was tired, weak, and struggling to pay for his food, saying his wallet was stolen. You paid for him and helped him to a seat. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She did remember. It was a cold, rainy evening. An old man had walked in, looking exhausted. He had counted his coins with shaking hands, realizing he didn't have enough money. She had seen the pain and embarrassment in his eyes. Without thinking, she had paid for his food. She had even brought him warm tea and sat with him until he felt better. It was a small act of kindness she had not thought much of. Now this stranger was bringing it up. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. The young man smiled sadly. That old man was my grandfather. Sophia froze. He never forgot what you did for him that day, he continued. He told me that he had met an angel, a woman with a pure heart. He wanted to know more about you. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. He did. He did a background check on you, Sophia. He learned about your struggles, your family, and your sacrifices, and he came to me with a request. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He asked me to marry you. Sophia's mind went blank. At first, I refused, he admitted. I didn't believe in arranged marriages. I didn't want to marry someone I had never met. But then. He swallowed hard. My grandfather passed away. His last wish before he died was for me to marry you. Tears filled her eyes. I wanted to honor his wish, but I didn't want to be forced into marriage. So I came up with a plan. I disguised myself as an old man to test you, to see if you were really as kind and compassionate as my grandfather believed. Sophia sat stunned and confused. Everything she thought she knew was shattered. What I didn't expect, he added, was to fall in love with you the moment I set eyes on you. Sophia's breath hitched. You have been nothing but an angel to me, he said, just like my grandfather said. She felt her world spinning. Everything suddenly made sense, the way he had listened to her, the way he had treated her family with kindness. And then he spoke the final words that made her heart stop. The Mr. Daniel that the villagers know is my grandfather. He looked into her stunned eyes and whispered, my name is also Daniel. Sophia sat in silence, her mind spinning with emotions. Everything she had believed, everything she thought was real, had changed. Mr. Daniel, the man she had agreed to marry, was never an old man. He had tested her, he had watched her, and he had fallen in love with her. She looked at him, the young, handsome man standing before her. Could she trust him? Her heart pounded as he suddenly clapped his hands. The door opened. 2 people entered. "Makeup artists," he said softly. She did. For the next few hours, Sophia sat still as the artists worked on his face, layer by layer, wrinkle by wrinkle. The young man slowly disappeared, and then, before her eyes, Mr. Daniel returned, the same old, wrinkled face she had come to know. The same man she had vowed to take care of. Tears filled her eyes. She stood up, walked forward, and touched his face. She could feel the makeup, the disguise, but it didn't matter anymore. A sob escaped her lips. She threw her arms around him. "I don't care how you look," her voice broke. "Young or old, I love you." Daniel held her tightly. "And I love you, Sophia." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, tears of relief and happiness flowing freely. At that moment, nothing else mattered, not his age, not his appearance, not how their story began. Only their love. And from that day forward, they lived happily ever after.